4 weeks, Kayla would come home completely drained, wrapped up in strategies on how she could one-up him at work. At first, she was fueled by a fierce determination, but over time, that fire started to flicker out. A few weeks later, she casually mentioned they'd started working together on projects. As their deadline for landing a big client drew closer, I couldn't shake an unsettling feeling, wondering if something more than business was going on between them. Kayla always tried to reassure me, but my mind kept wandering to uncomfortable places. On my way off the plane, as I reached for my bag in the overhead bin, I was already thinking of a way to invite Kayla out for a surprise dinner. I wanted it to be special but subtle. After a quick taxi ride to my hotel, I got into a friendly chat with the driver, who happened to mention a charming, dimly lit restaurant that lay right between my hotel and hers. His description sounded exactly like what I'd imagined, so after checking in, I took a quick shower, threw on some fresh clothes, and hurried out the door to find her before she made other plans. A glance at the clock in the lobby told me it was almost 5:30. The streets outside were bustling, and a walk to the restaurant sounded refreshing. Following directions from the receptionist, I found the place with ease and, just as the driver described, it had that cozy, tucked-away look I wanted. After tipping the driver well, I headed over to Kayla's hotel with a little more pep in my step. By 5:50, I was at her hotel's reception desk, and the woman behind the counter greeted me with a smile. "Hi there," I said warmly. "I'm Russell Green. Could you check if my wife, Kayla Green, is in her room? I'd like to surprise her if she's around." After repeating the name to confirm, the receptionist glanced at her records, nodded, and dialed Kayla's room number. A moment later, she looked up, apologetic. "I'm sorry, but there's no answer. Would you like to leave a message?" I tried to hide my disappointment. "Not right now. I was hoping to catch her off guard," I said with a smile. "Tomorrow's our anniversary. I'd appreciate it if you could keep this quiet." She returned my smile, understandingly. "Of course, sir. I hope you both have a wonderful day tomorrow." "Thank you," I replied. "Well, I'm off to a restaurant now. Maybe luck will be on my side." Turning away, I noticed a lively hall near the far end of the lobby, bustling with people eating, working, and serving. The place was packed, and I knew the odds of finding her in the crowd weren't great. I spotted a restroom near the back, took a moment to freshen up, then took a final look around. From the entrance, I carefully scanned the entire room, but there was no sign of her. Eventually, I took a seat in one of the high-backed chairs nearby, hoping to keep an eye out without drawing attention. Just then, a familiar faint laugh caught my ear. It sounded like Kayla. My heart picked up pace as I scanned the area again. Large booths blocked much of my view, leaving only snippets of people's faces visible. Not wanting to intrude at random tables, I paced slowly down the row of booths, cautious and observant. When I reached the third booth, my heart sank. There was Kayla, deep in conversation with a man I'd never seen before. She looked stunning in a dark, elegant dress, and the warmth in her expression struck me hard. Their conversation seemed far more personal than a business dinner. My pulse quickened as I saw him lean closer, and I instinctively steadied myself against the doorframe. Just then, she leaned in, and they shared a gentle, affectionate kiss. Overwhelmed, I stepped back from the doorway and moved to the center of the hall, sinking into one of the plush chairs, struggling to maintain my composure as I kept my gaze fixed on their table. Moments later, her laughter rang out again, and I looked over to see her strolling beside him, holding his hand with both of hers. Their closeness was undeniable, and the playful look they exchanged made something in me twist. They passed by just 15 feet away, chatting lightly, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the adoring look she wore as she gazed up at him. It had been so long since I'd seen her look at me like that. A lump formed in my throat, and I found myself speechless. Determined to confront this reality, I made my way toward the exit. I could feel the tension written on my face as I stepped outside, my eyes locked on them as they walked down the street, her arm linked tightly with his. Eventually, they turned a corner and vanished into the very restaurant the taxi driver had recommended. In a daze, I followed their path, but slowed as I reached the entrance, realizing I needed to gather my composure. I stopped a few paces away, took a deep breath, and steadied myself for whatever was to come next. The looks on their faces told me everything I needed to know, yet I still craved clarity. Although I couldn't fully wrap my mind around what I was seeing, I took a deep breath, summoned whatever strength I had, and pushed the door open, slipping inside quietly. I stayed close to the wall, blending into the shadows, as no one manned the entrance. I waited a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the soft, dim lighting. Slowly, the room came into focus, and there they were, seated at a small, intimate table for two at the far end of the restaurant. With my heart pounding, I carefully navigated along the walls, using them for support. Finally, I settled into a small table nearby, positioning myself just close enough to overhear them without being obvious. Almost immediately, a friendly waitress appeared, asking with a warm smile, "What can I get for you, dear?" "Double scotch on the rocks, please," I replied, doing my best to keep my voice steady. As I waited for my drink, I could just make out snippets of their conversation. The man's voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "Our meeting tomorrow doesn't start until 10, so we have plenty of time to celebrate tonight." Kayla responded with a hint of playfulness. "I'm glad you didn't let him push you into going home early." "Missing our 2-month anniversary? Not a chance." Her words, spoken with a slight wonder, hit me like a punch to the gut. 2 months. My mind reeled. "It could have been longer," he said, adding, "if you'd only accepted my offer back at the end of my first week." She laughed softly, brushing off his comment with ease. "I had to keep up the innocent act, you know," she teased. "After all, I'm still married." She shook her head, smiling at the memory of him approaching her, right in front of Susan, and asking her out while knowing full well about her marriage. "You know, Susan actually hinted that you might be interested in me," she added with a smirk. "We owe her for being our little matchmaker." Just then, the waitress reappeared, setting their drinks on the table. They raised their glasses, clinking them with a cheerful toast. "To the amazing 2 months we've shared, and to many more ahead," he said, his voice filled with promise. "I'll drink to that," Kayla replied with a bright smile. The waitress placed my scotch in front of me, interrupting my stunned state. "Here you go, dear. Is that all for now?" I handed her a $10 bill, saying, "Thank you, ma'am." As I turned my focus back to their table, they glanced up briefly, barely noticing my presence. Kayla must have sensed his gaze shift because she looked over too, her expression bright and full of emotion. "You know," I muttered, loud enough for her to hear, "a guy ought to carry a camera for moments like these." Her face filled with a mix of surprise and confusion as she registered who I was. "You're a picture-perfect couple," I added with an edge in my voice. "This would make one heck of a postcard." She sat there, lips moving soundlessly, stunned. In that moment, it all hit me, 2 months. Their little anniversary. I couldn't help but let a memory slip out loud. It's funny, 2 months. I still remember mine, but after 11 years, anniversaries aren't quite the same. I raised my glass. Here's to 2 months. A real symbol of love, prosperity. A couple like you deserves a gift. I tossed my wedding ring in her direction, the small piece of metal clinking as it hit the table. "Here's a little something from me." Realizing the tension, the man, Kevin, I gathered, interrupted Kayla with a loud protest, but I ignored him. Turning directly to her, I said, "Make sure he knows how lucky he is that he wasn't at my home." My voice lowered. "Please let me know where to send your things. It's probably best for both of you that you stay clear of my house. Maybe an ice pack will help with the ache this leaves behind." With that, I turned on my heel and strode out of the restaurant, my footsteps echoing in the silence I'd left behind. Once outside, I walked briskly back to the hotel, my mind spinning with anger, sadness, disbelief. It was unlikely that Kayla knew my current address, especially now, and after the scene I'd caused with her friend, I didn't think she'd be pursuing me any time soon. As I reached the front desk, I asked the attendant, "Excuse me, could you give me contact numbers for airlines? I need to book a flight urgently." She nodded, not missing a beat. "Of course, sir," she said. "Do you have a specific airline in mind, or a departure time and destination?" After quickly providing her with my details, she assured me she'd send the information up to my room as soon as possible. I took the elevator back up, but once I stepped inside, pacing restlessly took over. My mind raced with thoughts of the evening. How had this happened? Was there something about Kayla I'd missed all these years? Her performance tonight felt almost theatrical, and as my frustration grew, I realized I couldn't just sit there. Grabbing my bag hastily, I went back down to the lobby. Just as I arrived, the receptionist, who had just finished a call, waved me over. "Sir, if you leave now, you should make the last flight of the day. Registration closes in 30 minutes. Otherwise, the next flight is in 3 hours. "Thank you," I said, feeling a bit of hope. I signed the cash receipt she handed me, and she looked up with a kind smile. "I'm sorry you have to leave so soon. Please come back to stay with us next time." I nodded, appreciating her warmth, and turned for the exit. Memories flooded my mind as I walked through the lobby, but I quickly pushed them aside. I needed to leave. I hurried out to the nearby taxi stand, and as soon as I got into a cab, I leaned forward, my tone firm. "I'll give you $50 if you can get me to the airport in less than half an hour." The driver grinned, glancing back with confidence. "You got it, boss." True to his word, he handled the streets like a pro, getting me to the airport in just 20 minutes. I paid the fare, added a generous $150 tip, thanked the driver, and rushed into the airport terminal, my mind replaying the night's events. Only later would I realize that the worry eating away at me had been needless. After passing through security, I found I had it this time. I didn't need music to keep my mind busy. The airport provided enough distractions. A funny thought crossed my mind, and I had to stifle a chuckle. I remembered how Kayla's mother never really approved of me. Diana, on the other hand, practically ran her household, keeping her husband, Brian, under her thumb as if he were more of an accessory than a partner. Her treatment of him always rubbed me the wrong way, and she knew it. Once, she even went as far as accusing me of cheating on Kayla, claiming she'd seen me looking at other women. She didn't hold back with her opinions. On the flight, my mind was restless. Doubts gnawed at me, pulling me back to that scene I'd witnessed. Reaching into my wallet, I pulled out a photo I'd kept of Kayla and me, studying it intensely. The man in the image seemed to shift. He didn't look quite like me. I glanced around, making sure no one was watching, and then looked back at the picture. In it, I was beside Kayla, but the way she looked at him in my mind was troubling. How long had she been feeling this way? Though people often say men don't have the best memories, I'd always thought of myself as an exception. Kayla liked to challenge me with questions about the past. "Do you remember when we," or "Don't you remember that time?" She was always testing me. Lucky for her, I remembered everything, every plan we made, every whispered secret. But sitting here now, I began to question what else I'd missed. Had I been blind to this growing situation for 2 whole months? I recalled her saying that this man had shown interest in her from his first week at work, but she'd assured me she'd kept her distance, keeping up the pretense of being a married woman. The thought of their connection weighed heavily on me. So I devised a plan. I'd pack her things, drop them off at her mother's house, and start fresh. Her mother might find a way to blame me, but I needed clarity, even if it wasn't pretty. Finally, after landing, I headed straight to my car, joining the steady stream of traffic heading home. The drive was a blur, details slipping from memory as I wrestled with my thoughts. When I finally arrived, the house felt different, almost foreign. I dropped my bag in the hall and went to the kitchen, turning on the answering machine. Her voice filled the room, pleading in raw. "Russell, please, don't do anything hasty. I'm coming home to talk. Just wait for me, please." Her words hung in the air, strained with emotion. Part of me wanted her to face what she'd done, but I wasn't ready to hear her apologies, not with that tone in her voice. Acting on impulse, I slammed my fist into the wall, letting the pain ground me. I knew I needed to stay calm, to avoid doing anything I'd regret. Unable to settle, I headed to the garage and gathered up the suitcases she'd accumulated over the years. I chose a large black one and a smaller bag, set them aside, and took the others up to the bedroom. As I sifted through her closet, I packed the essentials into the black bag, repeating the process as I moved through her dresser. My mind wandered briefly, considering a late-night snack, but I brushed it aside. Once her things were packed, I loaded everything into my car, deciding to drop it off at her mom's house. The drive over was careful and deliberate. When I reached the house, I unloaded the bags quietly, stacking them near the garage. I didn't want to add to Brian's load. He already dealt with enough at home. As I dropped the last box, my mother-in-law appeared, her face etched with confusion. "Russell, what's all this? What's going on?" With a calm I didn't entirely feel, I replied, "Well, I thought Kayla might need her clothes when she gets here. I couldn't keep them in the house any longer. They were taking up too much space." Her face paled as she took in my words. "What do you mean, when Kayla arrives? I thought she was out of town. Why would her things be here?" "Diana, I'm not exactly sure how she plans to sort things out," I said. "But she might end up staying here with you for a while. There's a chance she's considering moving in with the person she's been spending time with, but I can't say for sure. That's why I brought her things." As I spoke, I watched Diana's face grow paler. She looked at me, stunned. "What are you trying to say?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "How could you even suggest such a thing? Kayla had to be there for work. She would never betray you like that." I sighed, choosing my words carefully. "Diana, I saw them together just last week. They were out at a nightclub near her hotel, celebrating their 2-month anniversary like they didn't have a care in the world. I'd asked her to come home for our anniversary, but she kept saying she couldn't make it. So I boarded a plane to surprise her, to be with her. And when I arrived, I found them at a romantic, candlelit dinner." Her disbelief grew as I went on. I felt like I'd stepped into a scene meant for someone else. They were sharing tender moments, exchanging kisses across the table. I barely understood what I was seeing. Later, I even passed them in the hotel lobby. I wanted to confront her right then, but I held back. She leaned in to whisper something to him, and I thought better of interrupting. Instead, I left to get some air and clear my head. I paused, remembering the painful details. To my surprise, they went from there to a nightclub. I found a spot at a nearby table and overheard her saying she didn't want to leave him on their anniversary. He corrected her, calling it their 3rd month together. That's when it became painfully clear I needed proof of what I was seeing. After 10 years sober, I took my first drink that night. Kayla was always worried about my drinking, thinking it could ruin our marriage. I'd given her my wedding ring as a sign of my commitment. But now, it's clear that he means more to her than I ever did. Diana's face crumpled as I finished. "You're lying," she said, almost desperately. "How could you accuse her of something like this after 11 years? You've been through so much together." I looked at her, my tone steady. "Diana, I'm not calling her my wife anymore. I know she's your daughter, and I understand you want to believe in her. But I don't owe her that kind of loyalty anymore. For 3 months, she's looked me in the eye and lied every day, without a hint of regret. If you think I'll welcome her back into my home after that, then you're even more naive than she is." Diana's voice faltered as she asked, "What do you want me to believe, then?" "I don't care what you believe," I replied. "I've made my choice. It's clear she has real feelings for this man, and if he wants her, he's welcome to her. Once she's done with this act, I'll direct her to you. Then you can see for yourself who's being dishonest." Without waiting for an answer, I turned and left, feeling restless and on edge. I spent the next few hours wandering aimlessly around my house, finally settling on a small corner in the garage where I set up an impromptu workspace. My mind was a mess, and the hum of my own thoughts was loud enough to drown out everything else. Then the doorbell rang, snapping me out of my haze. I walked cautiously to the door and opened it to find Kayla standing there, looking worn out and troubled. "You must have been in the garage," she said quietly. "I knocked, but you didn't hear me." "Just tidying up a bit," I replied, trying to sound calm. The disarray around me seemed fitting. She sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping. "Well, Mom called me. It seems you've already decided what to do about us." I looked at her, a strange mix of sadness and frustration building. "What did you expect, Kayla? That I wouldn't care about your affair?" She hesitated, as if caught off guard. "I wasn't thinking straight," she admitted. "Everything just became so overwhelming." I shook my head, feeling a strange calm come over me. "That's the shame of it, isn't it? Because I've had nothing but time to think. While you were out with him, sharing dinners and nights out, whispering and kissing in the dark, I was here, alone. I trusted you, and you lied to me every day, face to face, like it meant nothing. Is this really how you want to end 11 years of marriage? Her voice dropped to a whisper. Is this really how you want it to end? Yes, Kayla, I replied, almost surprised at my own conviction. Did you ever stop to consider how I might feel? Did it matter to you if I'd been the one seeing someone else? Did you think about asking me? But now it doesn't seem to matter anymore, does it? She looked at me, pained, but I continued. Now you and this man whose name I can barely remember can move on. No more choosing who to spend an anniversary with. You've made it clear. I sank into a nearby chair, exhausted, letting out a deep sigh. Kayla looked at me, trying to hold herself together. I think I understand where you're coming from, she said, her voice wavering. Do you really, Kayla? I replied, laced with doubt. Because I'm not convinced you do. For you, this might just be another mistake, something you can explain away or even pin on me somehow. Am I right? Maybe you think my actions pushed you into someone else's arms. Her eyes dropped and her shoulders slumped. No, I don't blame you for this, she said softly. It just happened. Just happened. I echoed, unable to hide my disbelief. A 2-month affair doesn't just happen, Kayla. Takes effort, constant effort, to keep up that kind of deception. And you and your lover have done quite the job, haven't you? I can only imagine the time and energy it took to keep up your little secret. Kayla's face flushed with a mix of shame and defiance. I can't believe you're making this sound so theatrical. That tearful phone call I made last night, it was real. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Maybe you found your calling, Kayla. With that kind of performance, you'd do well in drama. But don't expect me to believe it now. If this is how you treat someone you've loved, save me the act. Tell me, how can you claim to love me after this? Her eyes flashed with hurt. How could you doubt my love after 11 years? She said, her voice trembling. I leaned forward, narrowing my gaze. You like asking questions, so let me throw one back at you. Imagine if the tables were turned. Say I had slipped up once and been with someone else just once. How do you think you'd react? Her expression softened as she whispered, I would have asked you to leave. I would have filed for divorce. I nodded, acknowledging her honesty. I figured as much. You'd probably have thrown something at me on my way out. I chuckled darkly, letting the thought hang. Kayla tried to smile faintly, but I continued, pressing forward. Now, imagine if I'd carried on an affair for nearly 3 months. Imagine me spending my days with another woman, lying to you with a straight face. Do you honestly believe I'd still love you after that? She looked at me, speechless, her confusion and hurt evident. It's not as if I don't care about what happened. What we had mattered to me, Russell. When, Kayla? When did it matter? I asked sharply. When was the last time you even tried to be close? When did you act like my wife? After everything I've seen, it's hard to believe you're even standing here claiming you care. I'm not blind. I overheard your little chat with Susan, your matchmaker, the one you thanked for bringing you two together. It sounds like you've already chosen your next bridesmaid. Just need a best man now, right? Kayla's eyes widened, and she took a shaky breath. So, you're just like me now, aren't you? Should I expect a server to show up with divorce papers? She asked, her voice a mixture of bitterness and pain. I looked at her steadily. First things first. I need to know where you're planning to live, I said, my tone unyielding. There won't be a process server. I'll be handling this myself. This is over, Kayla. I'm moving on. If you ever see me with someone else, do me a favor and don't interfere. What are you trying to prove here? She asked, frustration showing. Prove? I scoffed. This isn't about proving anything to you. I did this for myself, not you. Why would I keep fighting for someone who's so willing to trample over my trust? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it all. That ring I gave you. It was supposed to mean something, but I see now that it's over. I don't want to waste any more of my time and energy on something that's dead. She looked at me, her face a mix of shock and sadness. So you're really just kicking me out and keeping everything for yourself? After 11 years, her voice had an edge of disbelief. It's always about a deal in the end, isn't it? I replied coldly. Well, here's the deal. If you need a place to stay, you'll have to figure that out on your own. As for me, I'm keeping the house. A tear slipped down her cheek as she stared at me, devastated. So now, it's my turn to sleep at his place, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I met her eyes one last time as she gave me a final look, a mixture of bitterness and resignation on her face, before she turned away. As she left, the house felt emptier than ever. But as I watched her go, I felt the finality settle in, a choice made, a door closing firmly on everything we'd once shared. I've fallen in love with him, Kayla said, her voice a mix of defiance and vulnerability. She paused, perhaps waiting for my reaction. Well, I assume you and Bast already found a place, I replied, my voice steady despite the words. His name is Kevin, she corrected, her irritation barely concealed. Honestly, I couldn't care less what his name is, I replied, frustration creeping into my tone. Does he not have a place you can stay? Of course he does, she shot back, a bit defensive. Well, problem solved then. My tone was sarcastic, but I didn't hold back. I could see her expression tighten. Are you sure his wife's going to be okay with this arrangement? I asked, watching her closely. She blinked, surprised and uneasy. How did you know about his wife? I'm not blind, Kayla, I said. Why else would you be here, if not to discuss the messiness of this whole thing? So, what's the deal? I continued, pushing. He's not planning to leave his wife for you, is he? Her demeanor shifted, her defiance softened by a trace of contemplation. I've thought about it long and hard. Our relationship lasted 11 years, but that's over now. I realized it was finished the day I took off my ring. Don't try to use our past as a bargaining chip, it's done. She looked down at the stack of papers in front of her. I'll sign them, she said, gesturing to the divorce documents. You can have the house if that's what you want. I've accepted it's over. Don't expect me to come crawling back or regretting this choice.